You're just here for optics, Karen. We need actual rainmakers now, not policy moms, Chase said with that smug, punchable MBA smirk, his voice soaked in the kind of arrogance that only comes from reading half a book on leadership and thinking you invented capitalism. The whole room went quiet. You could hear the neon lights above us buzz like a fly dying in a bug zapper. I blinked. Not because I didn't understand, but because I understood too well. New director of strategic finance, Chase with the teeth, had been here exactly 3 weeks and had already decided I was dead weight. Never mind the fact that I'd been the one keeping Northwalk Systems' financial skeletons tucked neatly in the compliance closet for 7 years. Never mind that I'd survived 3 CEOs, 2 CFOs, and a ransomware attack that almost cost the company its government certification. I was now, apparently, a policy mom. I sat there, stapled to the fake leather of my conference chair, surrounded by a sea of half-interested middle managers and junior analysts who didn't know me well enough to speak, and those who did, well, they looked away. No one wanted to be collateral in Chase's ego war, not when bonuses were on the line. Effective immediately, he continued, pretending to glance at a tablet I know damn well was just open to his fantasy football league. Restructuring committee responsibilities for the acquisition. The acquisition committee will now be comprised of forward-focused, impact-driven team leads. His eyes flicked to me for emphasis. Karen, we appreciate your past contributions. Past, like I was a discarded lunch tray at a middle school cafeteria. I didn't say a word. Not because I didn't have one ready, I had 10, but because I knew better than to give a man like Chase a reaction he could weaponize. Wanted indignation, a show, a tantrum he could replay later in Slack DMs or happy hour whispers. I gave him none of it. I simply closed my notepad, clicked my pen once, one click, controlled, and said, understood. He smiled like he'd just pissed on a boundary marker, then moved on. After the meeting, Sheila from legal, one of the few decent ones left, touched my arm in the hallway. He can't just do that, can he? I smiled back, thin-lipped. Sure he can. He just did, but inside? Oh, inside I was nuclear. The kind of slow, quiet anger that doesn't make noise. The kind that makes lists. I didn't go back to my office. I went to the server room. My badge still worked. He hadn't thought to revoke that yet, and I pulled a copy of the acquisition compliance tree I'd built with Janice before she got reorganized into early retirement. Then I went into my secure folder, the one Chase didn't know existed, and began opening my audit tracker. Not the one he'd see in our shared folder, the real one. The one with version logs, change logs, timestamps, and receipts. Lots and lots of receipts. You see, Northwalk's biggest problem wasn't bad actors, it was amnesia. Every time someone new showed up with a shiny title and buzzwords, they acted like they were building Rome from scratch. They ignored the permits, the foundations, the history. And they always paid for it. Chase was going to pay for it. Not today, not next week, but soon. He'd made the same mistake all the ego boys did. He underestimated the woman who built the pipes he was trying to flood. By Thursday, I was officially off the acquisition Slack channel. By Friday, I'd been reassigned to a risk audit advisory subcommittee with no actual responsibilities, no budget, and a rotating cast of interns. Chase didn't even pretend to justify it, just smiled and said, we need you focused on Karen things. He called me junior in emails, Karen things in meetings, laughed at my reminders about protocol. Once he CC'd spam on a thread where I pointed out a missing compliance checkpoint. Spam responded with a poop emoji. Chase laughed, so did his little army of yes men. That's when I knew I wasn't going to warn him again. Let him swim in his own ignorance. Let him take his little pitch deck and his podcast quotes and drive the whole thing into a wall. I'd be waiting with the receipts, the kind printed in triplicate and notarized with signatures no one remembered but me. He took my silence for submission. But I wasn't quiet because I was defeated. I was quiet because I'd already started the clock. The next Monday, Chase strutted in like he'd won a reality show nobody watched. He called it Monday Momentum. I called it HR Speed Dating for Your Career Obituary. The first all-hands he ran was less a meeting and more a purge disguised as a PowerPoint. He opened with a slide that said, Legacy not equal to leadership. Bold font. No irony. We're moving fast, he said, pacing in front of the projector like a failed tech speaker, and that means we can't be bogged down by outdated workflows, redundant processes, or frankly, people stuck in the old way of doing things. Old way. Translation, people who remembered how the damn place worked. He reassigned Tom, the only guy who could untangle our vendor authorization schema without a flowchart and 3 shots of espresso. Mary from compliance was retired early. Ben from systems, just gone, no announcement. His email bounced by noon. Every exit came with a nauseating euphemism, streamlined, rebalanced, revisioned, like we were just moving furniture instead of erasing decades of institutional memory. I wasn't surprised when he finally dropped the real reason for his musical chairs routine, the acquisition. He said it like he'd birthed it himself. We've got an incredible opportunity here, folks. Northwalk is entering a new era, and I'll be personally overseeing the $85 million escrow transfer. Personally. like it was a pizza order. I didn't clap when the rest of the room did. Most of them were too scared not to. The ones who weren't scared were already polishing their resumes. I stared at the line on his slide, escrow equals control, and I felt something in my stomach shift. Not fear, something colder. Calculating. That night I stayed late. The kind of late where the vending machine turns off and the janitor gives you that you okay look on his second round. I logged into the legacy system we'd built during the 2019 breach crisis, when we had to manually verify every point of chain of custody for funds after a dummy vendor tried to siphon off $3.2 million through a spoofed invoice. I remembered the chaos. The way we had to trace digital breadcrumbs in real time, like cutting wires on a bomb with a blindfold. It was why the chain of custody protocol was created. Why every escrow transfer had to pass through a designated custodian chain. It wasn't just bureaucracy. It was a firewall made of humans who remembered pain, and Chase had just torn it down. I ran a trace on the recent policy edits. Sure enough, he'd rerouted the fund transfer authorization structure to a new SOP he'd written himself, titled Streamlined Custodial Flow V2. No multi-signature verification. No secondary approvers. Just a single authorization path himself. I took a screenshot. Then I pulled out a blank section of my audit tracker, titled it Escrow Custody Overrides Unratified Changes. Underneath, I started logging 4/17 SOP chain edited. Author, C. Matthijs 4/17 multi-approval bypassed. New node, Chase auth 4/18 internal approval log, blank 4/18 risk assessment, not filed. I flagged it in a short memo. No panic, just clean language, clinical tone, like a surgeon describing a tumor. Subject, chain of custody protocol deviation to whom it may concern. Recent edits to our escrow authorization chain may pose risks in regulatory compliance and transactional integrity. Recommend immediate review. I sent it to Chase, Sheila in legal, and Brian in IT. 5 minutes later, Chase replied. One word, noted, then. Right below that, Sheila wrote, "Thanks, Karen, we'll loop in if needed." 2 hours later, I found a printed copy of my memo taped to the breakroom fridge with a Sharpie note over it. Karen wants her protocols back. Next to it, a post-it drawing of a dinosaur with glasses. I peeled it off, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my folder. Evidence. They thought it was funny, like watching someone speak Latin at a Fortnite tournament. I wasn't mad. I was taking inventory. From then on, every change Chase made, I logged. Every SOP overwritten, every staff reassigned, every approval path rerouted. I documented it all in a secure offline file, with screenshots, timestamps, and footnotes linked to our original 2019 compliance directives. He was building a bonfire out of red flags, and I was holding the smoke detector. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. Because Chase didn't just want to run the acquisition. He wanted to own it. Stamp his name on the spine and hand it to the CEO like a child bringing home a science project made entirely of duct tape and ego. Let him. Every empire built on shortcuts eventually collapses under the weight of what it skipped. And I was done warning him. I was preparing the autopsy. The Slack message came at 6:42 a.m. No greeting, no context, just a line that hummed with the smug confidence of a man who once plagiarized his own MBA thesis and still got a B. Stay in your lane. Let leadership lead. See, I stared at it for a full minute, my coffee halfway to my mouth, steam curling into the fluorescent light buzzing above my desk. The C was the best part. Like he was a Bond villain instead of a man who used the word synergy unironically and once called Excel a boomer skill. I didn't reply. Didn't need to, because that morning something had shifted. Not just in tone, in atmosphere. The kind of shift you feel in your bones, like the temperature dropping before a storm rolls in. Chase had pulled me from the deal channels, quietly. No announcement, no removal notice. Just gone. My access to the escrow logs, revoked. Internal calendar invites for prep calls, disappeared. I only noticed because I tried to open a call brief and got a 403 error. I messaged IT. Brian responded with a shrug emoji and a line that said, Chase asked for sign-off pruning. Guess he thinks your legacy? Legacy. I'd built the very architecture he was trying to operate. My initials were in the back-end tags. I took a long walk to the parking lot, phone in hand, not to scream but to think. I called Janice. She used to be the EVP of compliance until the reorg shoved her out the side door. She picked up on the third ring, voice raspy like she'd just come from a long meeting, or a short bottle of bourbon. I was wondering when you'd call, she said, no preamble. What did Chase do now? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she said, I got a weird ping from a friend on the buyer's legal team. Said their counsel's been trying to reach you. Got stonewalled. Guess who intercepted the request? I didn't need to guess. Apparently he told them you were no longer with the core team, that you were handling document archival. I almost laughed. Archival, that was rich. I hung up and drove home. Not to cry, not to vent, but because I needed quiet. I needed to open the one thing no one else remembered existed, my legacy employment binder. The hard copy version. The one I kept in a locked, fireproof drawer under my bed. Inside was the original response protocol from the 2019 breach. back when a Trojan payload almost drained our entire liquidity pool, and we had to shut down outgoing payments for 48 hours. I'd been the one to author the containment framework, including a clause no one bothered to reread after the crisis ended. Section 7.3b, Emergency Custodial Override in Event of Chain of Command Conflict. I flipped through the pages, eyes scanning language I hadn't read in years. My name, my title, a signature from our former COO, and a line that said in plain text, "In the event of any ambiguity, absence, or breach in the chain of custody protocols, the authority to approve, pause, or revoke escrow release shall fall to the designated custodial architect." There was a post-it still stuck to the page. Faded. One word in my handwriting, fail-safe. I sat back, noise in my head finally going still. The kind of silence you get right before ignition. They had no idea. Chase had walked into the cockpit and yanked wires without checking the manuals. He was mid-flight, bragging about altitude, and I was the one holding the parachute. I opened a new file, not on the server, not on my laptop. On a standalone USB drive I kept for contingencies. The kind of drive that had never touched the cloud. I named the folder Custodial Lockdown. Inside it, I began building what I would later refer to as the lever. A single file with 4 key components: the original clause with annotated highlights, a timeline of every change Chase made to override the escrow paths, evidence of my access being restricted without cause, a printout of the buyer counsel's unanswered request for contact. I encrypted it and backed it up in 2 places. One copy went into a sealed envelope mailed to myself, postmarked proof. The second went to a private inbox registered under an alias I'd created during the ransomware crisis. I was no longer preparing a defense. I was loading the chamber. They thought I'd been sidelined, forgotten, but I wasn't out of the loop. I was the loop. And when the time came to pull the emergency brake, it would be my hand on the lever, because Chase may have been the face of the deal, but I was the trigger. I started small. A single email to compliance, flagged low priority, nothing that'd light up anyone's Slack. The subject line was deliberately boring: Contract Provision Validation Inquiry Schedule D Archive Reference. I wrote, "Hi team, wanted to confirm whether legacy Schedule D items remain active under current role definitions." Specifically, Section 7.3b, language regarding custodial override authority in the event of chain conflict. Appreciate confirmation of archival status or revocation history. Best, Karen, no urgency, no red flags, just a quiet check-in, and I waited. One day, 2. By day 3, the email was still sitting there unread. Not even a got it will look. In the compliance department, no response is a response. It meant they either didn't know how to answer it, or they knew exactly what it meant and were hoping it'd go away, so I took it further. I logged into the contract archive system, the old one, the one built during the breach recovery when we still used hard-coded access tokens and printed out backup keys. I knew the archive path by heart. Legal Contracts Exec 2019 Post-Breach Amendments. There it was, my employment contract, still listed as active. No termination addendum, no revocation of Schedule D. Still binding, still signed. And there, buried in the scan, page 14, Custodial Override Clause 7.3b, my name typed next to Emergency Custodial Authority. No strike-through, no footnote, no expiration date. I exhaled slowly. Not relief, more like bracing for the next part, because now I knew the clause was real. Legal, untouched. But clauses are like bombs. They don't matter until you wire them for detonation. So I filed a new Schedule D. Technically, it was just an update. But functionally, it was a trigger. A tripwire made of plain legal text. I logged into the internal form builder and created a subaddendum. Per Section 7.3b of my employment agreement, I am updating Schedule D to reflect a single signatory override designation in the event of a custodial conflict. This amendment reflects current organizational ambiguity surrounding escrow release authority. No flourish, no commentary, just enough precision to make any junior legal analyst pee a little if they happen to read it. I submitted it via the internal doc portal. Version log, timestamped archived. Then I waited, again, no reply, no escalation, not even a notice of receipt. Chase hadn't seen it. Legal hadn't read it, but the system had logged it, which meant that when the light started flickering, and people began screaming about due diligence, and who signed off, I'd have a receipt. A record that I'd quietly set the fuse and nobody looked. The next day, I saw Chase in the break room, bragging to 2 junior analysts about owning the final mile of the escrow. He was holding a protein shake and a spreadsheet printout like he was conducting a TED talk in a gym. "I streamlined the whole flow," he said. "No more red tape, just me and the buyer's legal, start to finish." He didn't see me standing behind the fridge door pulling a yogurt. He didn't have to. The next morning, Sheila from legal bumped into me outside the building. She was carrying her coffee and 2 manila folders under her arm. "You still doing your, what do you call it, your insurance logging?" she asked without looking up. I smiled. Always. She didn't nod, didn't blink. Just walked past and muttered. Good. That night, I printed the updated Schedule D and sealed it in an envelope, addressed to the Office of External Audit. I didn't mail it, not yet. Just placed it in my drawer next to a flash drive labeled break glass. The countdown had started, the fuse was lit, and the people in the room had no idea the floor beneath them was made of paper. The day before the signing, Chase held court like he was starring in a Netflix biopic no one asked for. He'd taken over the East Conference Room, what used to be called the Situation Room back when people still respected how fragile this company really was. Now it was the War Room, apparently. The whiteboard was plastered with timelines, legal buzzwords, and a diagram that looked like someone taught a toddler how to use Visio. He stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled just enough to show his Apple Watch and one regrettable tribal tattoo. Look, he said, pausing dramatically between words like he was revealing nuclear codes. Control equals confidence. I've got both. A junior analyst giggled. Someone handed him a printout. He looked it over, nodded. Final signatory list looks great. Clean, streamlined. I wasn't on it. Of course I wasn't. I found out because Sheila, bless her, accidentally dropped a copy in the hallway outside legal. A pristine, bound packet labeled, signatory chain Northwalk Acquisition / buyer, Stormwell Capital. I picked it up before it hit the floor. There were 7 names. The CEO, Chase, legal. A couple directors who'd never stayed past 5 p.m. in their lives, but not me. No mention, not even a placeholder. Not even a line struck through. Erased. Sheila looked at me and said nothing. Just slipped back into the elevator like she hadn't just handed me a lit match. I didn't send an email, didn't ask to be included. Didn't schedule a meeting to clarify roles. Because this wasn't confusion, it was intent. He was trying to erase me. But you can't erase the architect without collapsing the roof. So I walked back to my desk, unlocked my drawer, and pulled out the hard copy of the updated Schedule D, the one referencing Section 7.3b, the one I'd time-stamped, signed, and filed without ceremony. I placed it on the scanner, made 3 copies. One went into my purse, one into a locked drawer at home. The third I mailed, overnight, certified, to an off-site archive address Northwalk used for old contracts. Then I put in a request for PTO, personal day, final escrow signing. Let the boys play in their sandbox. I'd be watching from the high ground. Before I left, I swung by the IT floor under the guise of checking on an old firewall update. Brian was there, half asleep behind a monitor. Hey, he said, you know someone rerouted the escrow system off-chain again? Weird temp node showed up last night. You doing a test? I blinked. Should I be worried? He shrugged. Not if you're the one who did it. I just smiled and said, guess we'll find out. He stared at me for a second longer than he needed to, then went back to whatever game he was secretly playing behind Outlook. That night, I lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and opened my laptop, not to email, not to Slack, but to a folder I hadn't touched in years, Northwalk Failsafe. Inside were snapshots of our original system workflows, access logs from 2019, incident reports, legacy clauses, and a spreadsheet titled, Trigger Chain If They Forget. Chase wasn't ready. The board wasn't ready, but I was. The next morning, I didn't log in. I didn't show up. I didn't need to. The wheels were already turning. The wires were already crossed. And somewhere in the background of Chase's perfect little signing party, there was a clause, cold, silent, legally binding, waiting to detonate the moment anyone reached for the finish line. And I was holding the detonator. The signing call was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. By 8:45, Chase had already double-knotted his victory lap shoes and was sipping a green smoothie like it contained the secrets of world domination. The boardroom was spotless, polished, cameras framed just right. Legal, finance, strategy, everyone dialed in with their Sunday faces on, ready to witness the coronation of King Chase the Clueless. The CEO was in rare form, all toothy optimism and high-octane nodding. This is a transformative moment for Northwalk, he said, for the 3rd time in 7 minutes. We're proud of how clean this acquisition has been. Lean, fast, aggressive. Chase leaned forward on cue, and above all, controlled. We've eliminated redundancies and streamlined every layer of the process. I've personally overseen all custodial routing, so there should be zero ambiguity. Across the screen, the buyer's attorney didn't react. Just kept flipping through the digital documents like he was counting cards at a blackjack table. His name was Elgin, gray suit, bald dome, voice like dry gravel. No smile, no jokes, just law. He stopped flipping. Paused, then said without looking up, I have a question about Schedule D in Miss Latimer's employment agreement. The room blinked. Chase's eyes narrowed, confused for half a second. Latimer, the CEO, coughed. Karen, I don't think she's not on the signatory team. Elgin still didn't look up. She's not required to be. Her clause doesn't pertain to signatory participation. It pertains to override authority in case of custodial conflict. Chase gave a little laugh. That clause is ancient. I'm sure it's been voided. Elgin raised one eyebrow. I have an active timestamp from the compliance archive dated 4 days ago. An updated Schedule D was filed. It references Section 7.3b. It's active. It's signed. The room shifted. One of the board observers leaned forward like they'd just realized the roller coaster was missing a bolt. Chase waved it off. There's no custodial conflict. The chain is clean. I've been managing it personally. Elgin's voice didn't rise. That is the conflict, Mr. Mattheis. Your unilateral assumption of the custodial chain, without secondary approvals, without the legacy custodian's release, is exactly what the clause is designed to address. I'm looking at the audit trail now. There's an anomaly in the routing sequence. One your system flagged but didn't resolve. Chase's face changed, slowly, from arrogance to discomfort to something that looked like a man realizing the parachute he packed was full of socks. Let's pause for a moment, the CEO said, his voice tight. We'll clarify internally. No need, Elgin said, still calm. I'm legally obligated to verify the chain before release. If there's even a potential breach, the funds cannot move. Clause 7.3b makes that very clear. You don't have authorization. I do have authorization, Chase snapped. I've been running this process since we started due diligence. You've been running a process, Elgin replied, still not raising his voice, not the process. The process requires a custodial sign-off from Miss Latimer or explicit revocation of her authority. I see neither. Someone on the Northwalk side muted themselves, probably to curse. Tension tightened like piano wire. You could almost hear the blood drain from the CEO's face. She's not even here, Chase said, grasping. She took the day off. Which, Elgin replied, finally looking into the camera, means she has not yet released the escrow. Silence. Absolute skin-crawling silence. Then a cough. Someone fumbled with their mic. The CFO leaned into frame, face pale. Let me double-check the logs. Elgin nodded. Please do. But unless you produce a signed custodial release from Miss Latimer, or legal documentation revoking her authority, the funds remain locked. Per contract, per law, I thought Chase started. You thought wrong, Elgin said. The screen flickered as the buyer's side muted themselves for internal discussion. Chase turned to the CEO, mouth open like he had something clever loaded up. But nothing came out. Just a sort of broken exhale, like a balloon giving up mid-birthday. Then the CEO said, low and bitter, who authorized overriding the legacy chain? No one answered. Because the answer was standing outside, sipping coffee on her porch with the morning sun in her eyes and a printed copy of Schedule D sitting beside her like a loaded gun. The video call was still on hold when Chase's lawyer, a twitchy junior partner named Lance, leaned forward into his laptop like he was about to Google his way out of a plane crash. Can we take a 5-minute break? He asked, blinking fast, voice quivering at the edges like a man who just realized the lock on the tiger cage might be decorative. No, said the buyer's attorney flatly. You can have 60 seconds to explain how your team missed a clause that predates your own tenure. Chase rubbed his jaw like he was trying to dislodge the last 24 hours. It's not valid, he muttered. It's legacy garbage. These old addendums, most of them are expired. No one even reads those anymore. The CEO was frozen, staring at the screen like he could will Elgin into forgetting everything. He couldn't. Lance stammered, even if it exists, surely her role was amended or reassigned. She hasn't been terminated. She hasn't signed a waiver. She hasn't signed anything, Elgin interrupted, holding up a copy of the employment contract like it was evidence in a murder trial. And your organization submitted an updated Schedule D signed by Miss Latimer 4 days ago. Are you arguing your own documentation is fraudulent? Chase looked like a man trying to breathe through drywall. Someone cleared their throat. It was the board chair. Get her in the room, now. Chase didn't look at anyone, just typed something into his phone. A minute later, a new Zoom square lit up. There I was. Hair still damp from a shower, no makeup, wearing a navy hoodie that said ask me about version control in faded lettering. A relic from a dev conference that happened 2 acquisitions ago. I looked like someone who didn't need to impress anyone ever again. Karen, the CEO said, voice razor thin. We're having a small issue with Schedule D. Which part? I asked, setting my coffee down slowly and reaching for the manila folder I'd been waiting to open since Tuesday. Lance looked directly into the camera and blinked 3 times too fast. Miss Latimer, we're just reviewing some historical provisions. We believe there may be a misunderstanding about the custodial override clause. It's probably outdated. I opened the folder, took out the printed contract, placed it in view. Page 14. Clause 7.3b. Emergency custodial override in event of chain of command conflict. Next to it, my name, my signature. My original title, Custodial Architect, Escrow and Risk Structures. And beneath it, the new Schedule D, 4 days old, digitally signed, timestamped, and archived by the system. The buyer's attorney didn't even blink. He just said, thank you, Miss Latimer. That's what I needed. Lance leaned back in his chair, face pale. He flipped through his own copy of the employment contract. I watched him as his mouth silently traced the words like a man reading a ghost story in real time. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, my God, it's her call. You could feel the panic hit the room like a silent concussion. The CEO closed his laptop halfway, then reopened it like maybe, just maybe, the screen would show something different the second time. Chase didn't speak. He didn't blink. He looked like someone who'd just discovered he'd sent a missile to the wrong coordinates and only realized it after pressing the button. The board chair finally spoke, voice flat as cold iron. Karen, is the escrow authorized for release? I met his gaze squarely. It is not. A full beat of silence. Then I slid a second document into frame. The flagged noncompliance memo I'd filed 3 weeks ago. The one Chase had forwarded to spam and marked as Karen things. Now, it had its own tab, red ink across the top, non-resolved, custodial block active. I watched the panic ripple across faces like a contagion. Laptops shuffled. Legal advisors whispered. One of the directors on the call muted themselves and turned beet red from the neck up. The buyer's attorney spoke one final time. Until the custodial hold is lifted, the deal is frozen. Per contractual statute and internal compliance precedent. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat there with my coffee, watching the realization settle into every line on Chase's face like mold and drywall. They'd erased me from the signing, forgotten the architect. Now they were trapped inside the building I'd designed, with the doors locked from the inside. When they called me back into the Zoom room for the final clarification, it wasn't a request, it was a formality. They knew who held the key. The tone had shifted. No more condescension. No more thanks, Karen. We'll circle back, just controlled panic wrapped in legalese. The board had gone quiet. Chase looked like he'd aged a year in the last 5 minutes, staring dead-eyed into his webcam like it owed him a refund. Miss Latimer, Elgin began, and this time there was a hint of respect. We appreciate your time and thoroughness. I just want to confirm, for the record, whether you approve the custodial release of escrow funds as per Section 7.3b and the updated Schedule D. The CEO straightened in his seat like he was about to plead. Chase didn't move. His lawyer looked like he was debating whether to feign a power outage. I leaned forward just enough for the camera to catch the edge of my folder sliding back into view. I do not, I said calmly. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a simple, quiet denial. Air left the room. On every screen, you could see the flicker of disbelief morphing into panic. Board members shifted. Someone muted and unmuted themselves 3 times. The buyer's finance officer whispered something off camera. Chase opened his mouth like he had a comeback loaded, but whatever it was died on his tongue. On what grounds? The CEO finally croaked, as if the words had to claw their way out of his throat. I pulled out the second document, flipped it open, and held it to the webcam, steady, slow, surgical. The red header read, Noncompliance Event Summary Custodial Obstruction and Failure to Disclose Variance. Filed internally on the 17th, I said. Marked unresolved. Never acknowledged, never escalated, never disclosed to the buyer's counsel. This summary outlines 3 key violations: unilateral reconfiguration of the chain of custody, suppression of legacy compliance alerts, and denial of buyer contact access. Elgin nodded like a priest watching the final nail go into the coffin. And who, he asked quietly, was responsible for the reconfiguration? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The document did it for me. Chase's initials were watermarked next to every procedural override, every shortcut, every burned bridge. The CEO let out a long breath like a man preparing to drown. Karen, can we fix this? I'm not stopping the deal, I said evenly. I'm stopping the liability. The clause exists to protect Northwalk from making irreversible transactions under procedural breach. This is sabotage, Chase snapped suddenly, voice raw. You were sidelined, you went rogue, I cut him off with a look. Not a word, just one glance. The kind you give a barking dog through a locked window. If I had gone rogue, I said, you wouldn't be in this meeting. You'd be in arbitration. The board chair leaned in, fingers steepled like he was praying to a god that stopped returning calls. Karen, what do you require for release? I already had it prepared. Full audit of the escrow transfer path, written acknowledgement of custodial breach, formal removal of unauthorized signatory overrides, and a written apology from Chase to the buyer's counsel. That last one made someone on the call choke. I think it was legal. You can't be serious, Chase hissed. I'm not joking, I replied. Wanted control? You bypassed every safeguard, mocked every warning, treated compliance like decoration. Now you can enjoy the full weight of what you built. He looked ready to lunge through the screen. Until then, I added, folding the noncompliance summary and placing it back in the folder, the funds don't move. The deal doesn't close. Per your own chain override, I am the last stop. The buyer's lawyer sat back and smiled faintly. Well, that's that then. I ended the call myself. Didn't wait for thank yous or backpedals or frantic damage control. Just clicked the red button and watched the screen go black. For the first time in weeks, the silence felt clean. Not heavy, not hostile, just final. They built a house without reading the blueprint, and now they had to sit in it with me holding the deed. I was still in the room, virtually, physically, legally, when the final line was delivered. Not from panic, not from ego. Just fact, unshakable. Inked into contract and backed by 7 years of risk architecture they'd all forgotten they stood on. The escrow, I said, slowly, clearly, with the same calm you use to explain to a child why they can't stick a fork in an outlet, cannot be released until the flagged noncompliance is cleared. Clause 7.3b of my agreement mandates a hold in the presence of a custodial breach. I could have stopped there. But I didn't. Your breach, I added, looking directly at Chase. And that's when it happened. The board fractured in real time. Polished veneers peeling back to show the raw, twitching panic underneath. Some were demanding timestamps. Others were shouting over each other. One director yelled for someone named Laura to pull every legacy doc we ever scanned. Another asked if we could just have legal redact the clause and push forward, which earned him a side-eye from the buyer's counsel so cold it could have shattered tempered glass. The CEO was muttering, "This can't be happening," over and over like a prayer to a dead god. The buyer's lead attorney stood up, literally stood up in his camera feed, closed the binder in front of him, and said, "We'll be postponing the signing until custodial resolution is confirmed and documented. No funds moved today." That sentence hit the room like a pipe bomb. Chase didn't move, didn't blink. He just sat there, hunched slightly forward, lips parted, staring into the middle distance like he was watching his name fall off the org chart in slow motion. His lawyer, Lance, bless his ineffectiveness, looked like a man halfway through a stroke, still gripping a yellow legal pad with nothing written on it. Across the table, someone pulled out a phone. Quietly, it was the CFO. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't yelling. He was texting. Fast, with the urgency of someone trying to stop a fire with a Dixie cup of iced coffee. I glanced at his screen as I walked past him, because at that point, no one was hiding anything anymore. The message he typed read, "Who signed off on removing her from the chain?" I didn't smile. Smiling would have ruined the moment. I just kept walking, out of the boardroom, past the glass doors, past the executive lounge Chase had commandeered and turned into his personal shrine to disruption culture. I walked like the building owed me back pay for every ignored memo, every eye roll, every "let the new guard handle this." They thought I was a footnote, a relic, a box checker from a bygone era. What they forgot, what they never understood, was that every system they were now so eager to burn had been built by someone who remembered why it was there in the first place. Me. They bypassed the architect, and now they were locked inside their own design. The signing didn't happen that day, or the next. The buyer demanded a full external audit. Northwalk's board convened an emergency compliance review. Chase was placed on leave. The CEO went dark for a week, and me? I took another personal day, no parade, no press release. Just a quiet walk home, folder in hand, and a sudden, rare silence in my phone's inbox. No Slack pings, no C-suite distractions. Just one message from Sheila that said, "Next time they say just legacy paperwork, send them this story." Because in the end, the people who rush to control everything always forget one thing. Control means nothing when someone else holds the trigger. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the coffee pot strikes again.